In the quiet town of Maple Springs, what began as a seemingly ordinary marriage took a dark and twisted turn. When a devoted wife stumbled upon the unthinkable truth that her husband was having a sexual affair with her own mother, the fallout was nothing short of catastrophic. One betrayal. One confrontation. One body on the ground. But behind the headlines lies a deeper story, of secrets, shame, and a man who couldn't face the consequences of his own deception. You're watching True Crime Stories Arena, where we dissect the most disturbing crimes with a narrator's lens. If betrayal, justice, and psychological unraveling fascinate you, hit that subscribe button, like, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's begin. The Green family epitomized the suburban dream. Madison Green, 36, dedicated her days to nurturing young minds as a second-grade teacher. Her husband, Douglas Green, a distinguished corporate law partner, was known for his unwavering commitment to justice. Together, they raised two children, Nathan, a spirited 9-year-old with a penchant for soccer, and Grace, a curious 6-year-old who loved painting. Their white house, framed by a manicured lawn, stood as a testament to their shared aspirations. Weekends were filled with church services, family picnics, and community events, painting a picture of harmony and contentment. As seasons changed, subtle shifts began to emerge. Douglas started returning home later than usual, citing pressing cases and extended meetings. Weekend trips, once family affairs, became solo ventures under the guise of work obligations. Madison, ever understanding, attributed these changes to the demands of Douglas's high-stakes legal career. Yet, the warmth in their conversations waned, replaced by brief exchanges and lingering silences. The once palpable connection between them began to fray, leaving Madison with a growing sense of unease. Seeking solace, Madison turned to her mother, Beverly Lawson. Elegant and charismatic, Beverly had recently moved closer, offering her support during these trying times. Her presence became a comforting constant, especially during Douglas's absences. However, Madison began to notice Beverly's frequent visits coincided with times Douglas was home alone. The lines between maternal concern and intrusion blurred, leaving Madison grappling with feelings of confusion and suspicion. The foundation of trust she had always relied upon now seemed uncertain, casting shadows over her once clear perceptions. It happened on a Wednesday morning. The kids had already boarded the school bus, and Douglas had left in a rush, forgetting the sleek black phone he always kept guarded like a vault. Madison didn't notice it at first, not until she was wiping the kitchen counter and saw the device sitting there, screen lit, humming with a new message. Normally, she wouldn't dare snoop. But something compelled her to glance. And then she saw it. A text notification. Just one line, from a contact saved as Mom Beverly. That wasn't her mom's contact name. That emoji didn't belong there. And what the message said. Madison's hands went cold. I still feel you on me. Her vision blurred. Her breath hitched. Her first instinct was denial, maybe a typo, a misdirected message, some twisted joke. But her trembling fingers betrayed her suspicion. Madison picked up the phone and tapped in. The screen opened without a password. It was unlocked. The universe was done hiding. What she found wasn't one message. It was dozens. And with every swipe, her world caved in further. There were messages going back months. Some short. Some long. Some so explicit they made Madison's stomach churn. Same room next Thursday. I miss how your hands feel on my waist. When you said I was better than her, it lit me up. Photos followed. Hotel names. Location pins. Screenshots of bookings, luxury suites in cities Douglas claimed to be working in. A pattern emerged. The dates aligned with their son's soccer tournaments, their daughter's ballet recitals, times Douglas had claimed to be overwhelmed with court deadlines. One message from Beverly, dated the weekend of Madison's birthday, shattered any remaining hope. I love when we don't have to pretend. When it's just us. And then, the final gut punch. A selfie, Beverly in a bathrobe, standing in a hotel mirror, her lipstick smudged, a hickey on her collarbone. The timestamp? The night Madison stayed home with a sick child while Douglas claimed to be stuck at a legal conference. Madison dropped the phone. Her hands were ice. Her heart wasn't breaking, it was imploding. She stared at the kitchen tile for what felt like hours. The hum of the refrigerator, the chirp of a distant bird, everything sounded distant, muffled, unreal. Her mother. Her own mother. Beverly, the woman who had rocked her to sleep as a child. Who had whispered comfort when Madison broke down over fertility scares. Who said she moved closer to help with the kids. And now. The other woman in her marriage. Not just betrayal, this was blood-deep treason. Madison didn't scream. She didn't call Douglas. She didn't confront Beverly. Not yet. She knew how easily liars spun stories when caught off guard. No, if she was going to do this, she had to be smart. She had to gather proof. She had to hold herself together long enough to make sense of the carnage. She backed up the messages. She sent every text and image to her private email. She logged the dates. The hotels. The patterns. She rehearsed her smile. Fixed her hair. Packed the kids' lunches like any other day. From the outside, she was Madison Green, the devoted mother, the supportive wife. But inside, a storm raged. A silent, strategic fury. That evening, when Douglas returned, she kissed him on the cheek. When Beverly called and casually asked if she should drop by to help with dinner, Madison said yes, her voice syrupy sweet. She set 3 extra places. And sat across the table from them both, the very people who had conspired in secret, who were now laughing at a joke she wasn't in on. She memorized their faces. Their ease. Their deception. She watched Douglas's hand linger a second too long when passing the salad bowl. She noted the slight smile Beverly tried to suppress when their fingers brushed. Madison didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She just watched. And waited. But Beverly, she sensed it. That night, as Beverly left and kissed her daughter on the cheek, there was a hesitation, a flicker of caution in her eyes. As though the temperature had changed. As though the air had thickened. And it had. Because Madison wasn't just broken anymore. She was building something now, something cold. Something calculated. And Beverly? She had just stepped into a game she didn't realize had already begun. There are betrayals you expect, flings, affairs, lies. But some deceptions strike from places so close, they feel like poison injected straight into your bloodstream. Madison Green had discovered the unthinkable, not from a stranger, not from a coworker or a secretary, but from the woman who gave her life. Her mother. And now, the war was silent. But the silence wouldn't last. The evening air in Maple Springs was warm, tinged with summer jasmine and the faint aroma of grilled corn from a neighbor's cookout down the street. But inside the Green household, the air was thick with tension, unspoken words and secrets that had curdled over time. Dinner was routine. Nathan had pushed peas around his plate, and Grace hummed her favorite cartoon song between bites. Douglas chatted about a tough day at the office, and Beverly, ever composed, complimented Madison's pot roast. It was all a performance, an unsettling act where only Madison knew the lines were rehearsed. But the curtain was about to drop. Once the dishes were done, the kids tucked in and Beverly had retreated home, Madison stood in the living room, motionless. Her fingers grazed the back of the couch as she stared at the man she once called her partner. Douglas, she said. Just his name. Calm, steady. He looked up from his phone, distracted, then noticed the expression on her face. The lack of warmth. The lack of anything familiar. Madison stepped closer. I know everything, she said. He blinked, confusion flickering across his features, then defensiveness. Know what? The texts, she continued, voice even. The hotel rooms. The meetings. My mother. Silence. Complete and consuming. Douglas stood, jaw clenched. What are you talking about? Madison didn't flinch. I read them all. For a second, he said nothing. Just stared at her like a man walking blind into his own verdict. Then the color drained from his face. You went through my phone. He said, trying for outrage but failing to mask the quiver in his voice. I saw enough to understand the kind of man I married, and the kind of woman my mother became. He opened his mouth, closed it again. 1,000 defenses flitted across his face, but none stuck. Panic had entered the room, and it clung to him like sweat. "I can explain," he began. "I don't want an explanation," Madison said. "I want the truth. And I want you to stay away from our children." The words hit him like a slap, and suddenly, he wasn't the corporate lawyer anymore. He wasn't polished or in control. He was raw. Cornered. "Don't do this, Madison," he said, stepping toward her. "You don't have to ruin everything." She stepped back. "I didn't ruin anything. You did." And with that, she turned and walked out the sliding glass door into the backyard. The moon hung low, casting a bluish glow on the garden she'd tended for years. She needed air. Space. A minute to breathe through the shaking in her bones. Behind her, the door slid open again. Douglas followed, his footsteps muffled on the soft grass. His breath was shallow, his silhouette tense. Madison could hear the rustle of his clothes, the rapid beat of his pacing heart even in the quiet of the night. "You think you're so perfect," he hissed, voice a whisper meant for no one but her. "Like you never made mistakes. Like this family was just yours to control." She turned to face him. "You made your choice. You can't undo it now." He stepped closer. "You're not going to destroy me. You're not going to take my life away." His eyes were wild now. Desperate. Something feral had awakened. "I'm not the one who tore this family apart," Madison said, her voice breaking for the first time. And then, something changed in his posture, a shift from words to instinct. Rage swallowed hesitation. Douglas lunged. It happened in seconds. He wrapped his hands around her neck, pushing her back into the garden soil she once lovingly tilled. The moonlight shimmered off the tears in her eyes, the shock etched across her face. She struggled, kicked, clawed, gasped, but Douglas was relentless. A decade of polished manners meant nothing now. He was primal. Terrified. "Don't ruin this," he whispered again and again, as though convincing himself that she could still forgive him. That this wasn't already far past the point of return. The sound of night crickets faded. The flutter of leaves fell silent. Time dissolved. And then, just like that, it was over. Madison lay still. The garden light flickered overhead. Douglas fell back, panting, shaking. The realization crept in slow, sickening waves. What he had done couldn't be reversed, rewritten, or reasoned away. Not even in a courtroom. Not even in confession. In a town built on Sunday smiles and picket fences, the darkness didn't come with a scream. It came with a whisper. With bare hands and a broken soul. On July 8, 2023, the perfect life Madison Green had once imagined ended under the moonlight, strangled by the very man who promised to protect her, silenced because she dared to speak the truth. In the garden she planted with love, her life was taken in fear. And from that night forward, Maple Springs would never be the same. The first light of dawn crept over Maple Springs with a deceptive calm. The street was quiet. Lawns sparkled with dew. And from the outside, the green home looked as pristine as ever, its white facade bathed in soft amber glow. But in the backyard, something was wrong. Douglas Green was pacing the grass barefoot, shirt untucked, face pale. He moved without purpose, murmuring to himself, hands clenching and unclenching like he was trying to squeeze time back into his grip. At exactly 6:17 a.m., a neighbor named Elaine Chambers, an early riser and dog walker, saw him from her kitchen window. Something about his movements felt off. Not just grief. Not just shock. Something else. Something broken. She dialed 911. When first responders arrived, they found Douglas sitting on the edge of a patio chair, staring at the lawn. "I found her like that," he said before they even asked. His voice was low, almost rehearsed. Inside the house, the children were still asleep. Upstairs, unaware that their mother's body lay at the far end of the garden, just beyond the roses she had planted that spring. Detective Raina Morris was called in within the hour. Calm, methodical, and with 15 years of homicide cases under her belt, she knew how to read a scene, and how to read a suspect. She observed Douglas as he answered questions, evasive eyes, delayed responses, trembling fingers. He insisted Madison had gone outside after a minor disagreement and never returned. That he thought she was simply blowing off steam. But Morris had seen this story before. And it never ended in peace. As the forensic team cordoned off the scene, the details began to betray Douglas's version. Madison had bruising around her neck, symmetrical and concentrated. There were no scratches, no torn clothing, no defensive wounds. Which meant one thing, she likely knew her killer. The medical examiner confirmed death by manual strangulation. Quiet. Intentional. Controlled. Meanwhile, neighbors came forward. Elaine Chambers mentioned muffled voices the night before. Another neighbor, Mr. Alvarez, reported hearing what he thought was an argument just after 10 p.m., a woman's raised voice followed by a heavy silence. Douglas, however, claimed he had been in bed by 9:30 p.m., exhausted from work. He stuck to that story even when inconsistencies began to mount. His phone's health data told a different tale. High heart rate readings well past 11 p.m. Step count spiked between 10:12 and 10:35, coinciding with the time window the medical examiner estimated for time of death. It wasn't proof. But it wasn't nothing. And Detective Morris wasn't the type to ignore red flags. Then came the first real crack in Douglas's carefully rehearsed shell. Her name was Jessica Hall, Madison's closest friend and colleague from the elementary school. She arrived at the police station in tears, clutching her phone and a printed envelope of screenshots. She knew, Jessica said, her voice trembling but determined. Madison knew about the affair. According to Jessica, Madison had confided in her just 4 days earlier. She had discovered messages between Douglas and her own mother, explicit, intimate, and damning. She said she felt like she couldn't breathe, Jessica explained. She was devastated. But she wasn't out of control. She was focused. She was planning to confront them both. Jessica pulled up the texts Madison had forwarded. They were clear. Graphic. Timestamps matched with dates of known hotel bookings and solo trips Douglas had claimed were legal retreats. One message from Beverly stood out. She doesn't suspect a thing. We'll always have what she'll never understand. Jessica also confirmed that Madison had started backing up messages and searching for legal counsel. She had mentioned protecting her kids, possibly filing for full custody. I begged her to be careful, Jessica whispered. I told her to wait. But she didn't want to live in silence anymore. Suddenly, motive wasn't a theory anymore. It had a shape. A voice. A name. And Detective Morris knew where to look next. Douglas had deleted the incriminating texts from his phone. Or so he thought. But technology has a long memory, and police have tools to dig deeper. With a court order and a forensic tech unit, investigators retrieved his device's deleted content. And what they uncovered painted a story no lawyer could spin into innocence. Dozens of messages between Douglas and Beverly, lustful, raw, and laced with disdain for Madison. She's too busy playing perfect wife to notice. We deserve this. We always have. Photos. Hotel receipts. Even GPS metadata that placed them at the same location during supposed solo trips. Then came the final blow. A message from Beverly, dated July 6th, 2 days before Madison's death. She's getting colder. Be careful. If she finds out, everything crumbles. Douglas never replied to that message. It remained unread in the recovered backup. It didn't need a response. Because 2 days later, Madison Green was dead. Detective Morris compiled the evidence meticulously. Motive, shame, fear, exposure. Method, controlled, intimate, silent. Circumstance, betrayal layered with desperation. And as Morris stood over the evidence board, piecing the final strands of the puzzle, she understood the truth. Douglas Green hadn't just killed his wife. He'd killed the only person who trusted him enough to believe the lie that their life was still whole. The interrogation room was cold and gray. A single camera captured every twitch, every hesitation. And seated in the middle of it all, Beverly Lawson, mother of the victim, lover of the accused, wrapped in a beige cardigan and trembling hands. At first, she was devastated. Tears streamed freely. Her voice cracked as she called her daughter's name. I don't understand, she whispered. Madison was my baby, she was everything. Detectives offered tissues. Silence lingered. But they didn't interrupt her grief. They let it unfold. And then, slowly, they started to pull at the thread. Detective Raina Morris sat across from her, posture composed, eyes steady. "When was the last time you saw Douglas before Madison's death?" she asked. Beverly sniffled. I don't remember exactly. Maybe a few days." But her phone records disagreed. Location data showed she had met Douglas in a hotel just 48 hours before Madison died. When confronted, Beverly hesitated. "I thought we were over," she said finally. "I told him to stop. That it was wrong. I tried. But the texts told a different story. They painted a picture of intimacy, of desire, of secrecy maintained far longer than she claimed." Beverly's hands trembled. Her voice lowered. "I never thought he'd hurt her," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not Douglas. Not like that." But guilt clung to her like perfume gone sour. Detectives watched her contradictions mount, her timeline shifting, her remorse clashing with self-preservation. Eventually, the performance cracked. She admitted to the affair. Admitted it had gone on for months. Admitted she knew Madison was close to finding out. But denied knowing what Douglas was capable of. Still, to the trained eye, her grief was complicated, not just from loss, but from complicity. From the unbearable weight of knowing her choices had helped set the stage for her daughter's death. The mother who claimed she came to help had become the woman who helped it all unravel. It was day 3 of the investigation when Detective Raina Morris sat across from Douglas Green for the second time. This time, she wasn't here to ask questions, she was here to corner him with answers. The evidence was overwhelming now. They had retrieved the deleted messages. They had GPS data placing him outside the house the night Madison died. They had Beverly's partial confession. And they had his silence, his increasingly fragile, unraveling silence. Douglas looked worse than before, his suit wrinkled, face pale, his hands twitching beneath the steel table. For a man who had once argued billion-dollar contracts in boardrooms, he now struggled to meet a detective's eyes. Morris placed the stack of printouts in front of him. Text messages between him and Beverly. Coordinates. Time stamps. Photos. All laid bare. "She admitted to the affair," Morris said flatly. "She said you were afraid Madison would tell the children. That she'd ruin you." Douglas didn't respond at first. Just stared. Eyes blinking, throat moving as if the truth had risen but couldn't yet escape. Then came the question. Not an accusation, just a truth hanging in the air. "What happened that night, Douglas?" He looked at the wall. Then down at the table. And then, finally, he spoke. "She said she was going to expose us." His voice was hollow. Barely audible. "She told me I'd never see the kids again. That she'd make sure of it." There was a long pause. His hands pressed together, tight. Still trembling. "I didn't plan it," he whispered. "It just, everything snapped." He described the backyard. The moonlight. The argument. Madison turning her back on him. Her voice rising. "I grabbed her. I didn't think, I couldn't let her do it." The words spilled out like something he had repeated 1,000 times in his mind, yet still couldn't believe he was saying aloud. "I thought maybe she'd push me, hit me, scream. But she didn't. She just looked at me. And I lost control." He paused. Swallowed hard. "By the time I let go, she was gone." Douglas sat back in the chair like the wind had been knocked out of him. As if confessing had physically emptied him. "I didn't know what to do," he continued. "I sat in the living room for hours. Just, staring. The kids were sleeping. I couldn't move. I was numb." Detective Morris said nothing. She didn't have to. The confession didn't bring relief. It didn't cleanse the room. It only confirmed what the evidence had been screaming all along, that a man who claimed to love his wife had ended her life in silence, in fear, in rage. The courtroom was silent when Douglas Green entered in handcuffs. The same man once known for his eloquence and sharp legal mind now looked hollow, thin, withdrawn, his once pristine appearance now just a shell. The gallery was packed, local reporters, grieving friends, quiet whispers of neighbors who never imagined something like this could happen in their community. Madison's absence hung like a shadow over every seat. The prosecution wasted no time. They outlined everything with devastating precision: Douglas's motive, the explicit affair with Beverly Lawson, the timeline of the murder, and most importantly, his full confession. They played audio of his interview with Detective Morris. The jury listened in stunned silence as he admitted to the act. This wasn't a moment of rage, the prosecutor declared. It was a calculated reaction to being exposed. The text messages were projected on a screen. She said she'd expose us. I panicked. Every word another nail in the coffin. The defense tried to shift the narrative. They called it emotional insanity. A perfect storm of shame, betrayal, and fear of losing his children. They painted Douglas as a man overwhelmed, crumbling under the pressure of a life he could no longer control. But it wasn't enough. When it came time for witnesses, one name was missing. Beverly Lawson. She had been subpoenaed. She had once claimed she wanted justice for Madison. But when the moment came, she refused to take the stand. Through her attorney, she cited an emotional collapse. Mental distress. Unfit to testify. The court allowed it, but not without raising eyebrows. The woman whose betrayal helped spark the tragedy now chose silence. It took less than 4 hours for the jury to deliberate. Guilty. Douglas Green was sentenced to 60 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge's words were firm, but final. You ended a life not out of impulse, but out of selfishness. The court sees no room for mercy. There were no dramatic outbursts. No final statements. Douglas simply stood there as the verdict washed over him. His eyes didn't seek forgiveness. He didn't cry. He just nodded. As for Beverly, she left Maple Springs weeks later. Packed her things and disappeared into quiet disgrace. She left no forwarding address. No apology. Only a lingering reminder of what betrayal can cost. The Green children, Nathan and Grace, were placed in the custody of Madison's younger sister, Caroline. Far from the White House with the green lawn. Far from the whispers and the looks. They would begin again in a new town, under new guardianship, carrying the weight of what happened, but spared from its shadow. Sometimes betrayal doesn't come from enemies, it comes from those we call family. Madison trusted her husband. She confided in her mother. But love turned to lust, and loyalty collapsed under deception. In the end, silence wasn't safety, it was the final sound before death. If today's case gripped you, hit like, subscribe, and share your thoughts below. Was this just a man pushed to the edge, or something far darker? You're watching True Crime Stories Arena, where secrets never stay buried.